Popular Sovereignty and the Compromise of 1850. Causes of the Civil War. Terms. Popular sovereignty. Let the people of the territories themselves decide whether slavery would be permitted. Compromise of 1850 was a deal to keep the balance between states and territories equal on the issue of free or slave. What happened with popular sovereignty? The American people felt that it was not up to the federal government to choose which states could be free or not. So the idea of popular sovereignty arose, which allowed sovereign people of the state to choose what their state would be, free or slave. This term, coined by Lewis Cass, would become the main platform argument for future presidential candidates. Understand it. Here is how pro-popular sovereignty advocates felt. Why should a citizen of one state be denied the right to take his property, including slaves, into a territory owned by all? Problems with popular sovereignty. The main problem with popular sovereignty is how would the people vote? Voting by ballot would take months, thus causing violence and riots. Voter fraud. There was no way the government could detect voter fraud, which would not bring justice or equality, and cause problems for one side or the other. Compromise of 1850. The background of the Compromise of 1850. Of all the problems facing Congress in 1850, none were as big as the issue of balance of the U.S. between free and slave states. After many years of no solution, Henry Clay tries for the third time to sell his idea of a compromise. Once President Taylor died in office, President Fillmore takes over and is more willing to go for the compromise than his predecessor. By September, Clay's compromise was now law. What was gained and what was lost? The North gets California admitted as a free state, slave trade prohibited in Washington, D.C., and Texas loses boundary dispute with New Mexico. The South gets no slavery restrictions in Utah or New Mexico territories, slaveholding permitted in Washington, D.C. Texas gets $10 million, and the Fugitive Slave Law. Fugitive Slave Law. The intention of the Fugitive Slave Law was if the North had ever found or caught a slave, they were instructed under law to return the slaves. There was a penalty for not returning the slaves accordingly. Was this fair? Though it may look fair, many historians say the North had won for the reason that they had gained California, which would mean the North held the majority of the Senate. The North has also realized the Fugitive Slave Law is hard to enforce, or that it wasn't even possible to enforce. The end result. Both solutions had only prolonged peace, but not really solved any issues, except for set the stage for the next round of hostile events. Kansas-Nebraska Act. Causes of the Civil War. Background. In the 1850s, Americans wanted to move into the Nebraska Territory, but no one would move in there until Congress would permit them to hold land. Stephen Douglas saw this as a good place for a transcontinental railroad, and wanted Nebraska available for land purchase. This could not happen until the South supported Douglas. The South would not support him because Nebraska was above the 3630 parallel line. What is the 3630 line? This line is a latitude line that divided the country between North and South. Any state north of this line was to be free, and anyone south was able to have slavery. This was put in place in the Missouri Compromise. This line is the reason why the South would not support Douglas, because Nebraska was north of this line, meaning it would become a free state. What happened? Douglas inserted his Nebraska bill in an explicit repeal of the Missouri Compromise, so that no territory would be automatically designated as non-slaveholding. As an alternative, the bill declared that slavery issue in the Nebraska region will be decided by popular sovereignty, thus extending the Compromise of 1850's concept of popular sovereignty. Effects of the Act. As a result of this bill passing, we saw again yet another obstacle, thus separating the North and South even more. The Whig Party had totally split. Southern Whigs were taken in by the Democrats, and Northern Whigs reorganized themselves as Republicans. Border Ruffians. The passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act would lead to a civil war between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers in Kansas. Missouri counties that bordered Kansas were strongly pro-slavery and wanted their neighbor to be a slave state. Over 1,700 men from Missouri went into Kansas to vote for their pro-slavery representatives in 1854. These were the infamous Border Ruffians, who threatened to shoot, burn, and hang those who opposed slavery in 1854. The result of the Border Ruffians. The Border Ruffians' vote had been considered fraud, but yet their government had taken power anyways. The government set up harsh laws about people who opposed slavery. The government made even the Border Ruffian law, where you did not have to be a citizen to vote on issues. But within a year's time, anti-slavery settlers moved into Kansas and were not about to obey the law. These free soilers set up their own government. Guns. In 1856, Amos Lawrence, a man who provided aid to anti-slavery settlers, had given free soilers rifles and ammunition to defend themselves. Pro-slavery legislation in place wanted to indict for the free soilers for setting up their own government. On May 21, 1856, the pro-slavery forces sprung into action, sending 800 men into Lawrence, Kansas, where most of the free government officials lived. Those 800 men arrested the officials and destroyed and looted the town. The Pottawatomie Creek Massacre. On the night of May 24th, 3 days after the Lawrence affair, John Brown invaded the small community of Pottawatomie Creek. He and 7 others ran throughout the town, setting fire to buildings, and one by one, Brown's group dragged out helpless victims and hacked at their heads with broadswords. It was the South's turn to be outraged. Destroying property was one thing, but no one had been killed at Lawrence. Senator Charles Sumner. Charles Sumner, on May 21, 1856, gave a bitter speech in the Senate called The Crime Against Kansas. Essentially, the speech offended every Southerner. The South's culture was one of pride and honor, and when someone messes with that, they will pay. Well, pay Sumner did. 2 days after the speech, Sumner was beat over the head in his office with a gold-tipped cane. Sumner did not die, but it took years to recover. After Sumner was beat, the North was again furious with the South. So now we have the North and the South taking hits at each other and continuously making the other more and more mad. The Dred Scott Case. The Dred Scott case was a case about the rights of free black man. Was he free in the North but not in the South, or was he free in both? Basically, Dred Scott was brought to an army post in today known as Minnesota. He was there when Missouri Compromise stated that all states above that line were free. He was supposed to be free when he returned to Missouri, but in 1846 he was threatened to go back into slavery because of popular sovereignty. He sued for his freedom. After he first tried to sue for Sanford, it took 11 years till the case was brought to the Supreme Court. The rulings of the court is where the problems start. The court ruled, Scott's sojourn did not make him free when he returned. He could not be a U.S. citizen because he was not sovereign, therefore he could not sue others. Congress never had the right to outlaw slavery in other states and territories. What does this mean? This means the South had a huge political win in the slavery issue. Once the Supreme Court says something is unconstitutional, the other branches have to fix it. This upset the North even more. Now hope for the Union was bleak. Lincoln and Douglas debates. From August 21st until October 15th, Stephen Douglas battled Abraham Lincoln in the face-to-face debates around the state of Illinois. The prize they sought was a seat in the Senate. Douglas still advocated popular sovereignty. Lincoln pointed out that Douglas's position directly challenged the Dred Scott decision, which decreed that the citizens of a territory have no such power. Time and time again, Lincoln made the point that a house divided could not stand. Lincoln felt that the blacks were entitled to the rights enumerated in the Declaration of Independence, which include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Douglas argued that the founders intended no such incursion for blacks. Lincoln had lost the prize, but this loss was Lincoln's biggest victory. Harper's Ferry. On October 16, 1859, John Brown led a small army of 18 men into a small town of Harper's Ferry, Virginia. His plan was to instigate a major slave rebellion in the South. He took weapons and ammo from a federal armory. He sent out messengers to tell slaves about the uprising and when to start it. However, The federal government was able to stop the raid before it could happen. John Brown was tried and hanged for treason on December 2nd that year. So what's the big deal? After the news broke out about the attempt, the country again became further apart. The North felt that John Brown was a martyr, and that he was doing what was right for the better good of the nation, although many newspapers in the North denounced the raid. However, the South was in disbelief that someone from the North would try to end their very lives over what our Constitution protects us from. Many Southerners felt that the Republicans had supported Brown. Election 1860. The Democrats. By the time the election year came around, the Democrats were in turmoil. They had no one to run for president. Stephen Douglas had the best chance of defeating the Black Republicans, but many Democrats did not like that Douglas supported popular sovereignty, as giving the nation a choice of slavery or free. The Northern Democrats chose Douglas, while at a separate convention, the Southern Democrats nominated the Vice President, John C. Breckinridge. For the Republicans saw the turmoil that the Democrats were in and realized this was something to capitalize on. The only thing they needed was someone who could get electoral votes. Abraham Lincoln was the man. The Independents. A number of aging politicians and distinguished citizens, calling themselves the Constitution Union Party, nominated John Bell of Tennessee, a wealthy slaveholder, as their candidate for president. They felt the best way to deal with slavery was not to deal with it at all. The results of the election. With 4 candidates in the field, Lincoln received only 40% of the popular vote and 180 electoral votes, enough to narrowly win the crowded election. This meant that 60% of the voters selected someone other than Lincoln. With the results tallied, the question was, would the South accept the outcome? A few weeks after the election, South Carolina seceded from the Union. The South succeeds. The force of events moved very quickly upon the election of Lincoln. South Carolina acted first, calling for a convention to secede from the Union. State by state, conventions were held, and the Confederacy was formed. The Charleston Mercury said, "The tea has been thrown overboard. The Revolution of 1860 has been initiated." What happened? 2 U.S. senators from the South submitted their resignations. On December 20th, 1860, by a vote 169-0, South Carolina legislature states that other states had seceded and were no longer part of the Union. On February 4th, delegates from seceded states, except Texas, meet in Montgomery, Alabama, to create a staff of government called the Confederate States of America. They elect President Jefferson Davis. Last-ditch effort. As a last-ditch effort that was made to end the crisis, Senator James Henry Clinton proposed to amend the Constitution to extend the old 3630 line to the Pacific. All territory north of the line would be forever free, and all the territory south of the line would receive federal protection for slavery. But the Republicans refused to support the bill.